Montana Territory, spring 1873. The wind cut across the high prairie like a blade, and Rose Catherine Winters believed it carried the voices of the dead. At 23, she had already buried a husband and convinced herself that her heart had gone into the ground with him. She stood on the porch of her small ranch house, watching the cattle scatter across the brown grass, and told herself the same lie she had been telling for 2 years. That loneliness was safer than love, that a closed heart could not be broken again. The ranch her husband left her was modest, 300 acres pressed against the foothills of the Rockies. Thomas had died of pneumonia their first winter, leaving her with debts, cattle, and the cold comfort of self-reliance. Rose had dark brown hair that she kept pinned severely back, and gray eyes that had learned not to hope for much. She wore black still, though the proper mourning period had passed. The black calico dress with its high collar and long sleeves had become her armor against the world. She had learned to shoot, to mend fences, to break ice on the water troughs in winter. She had learned that depending on no one meant never being disappointed. The townspeople in Bent Creek called her formidable, and she wore the word like another layer of protective clothing. Love was for fools and dreamers, she told herself. The frontier demanded harder stuff. But the cattle kept wandering through a broken section of fence on the eastern boundary, and Rose did not have the money to hire help or the strength to repair it alone. She had been patching it with rope and prayers, but a proper fix required posts and wire and a strong back. Pride had kept her from asking for assistance, but practicality was beginning to win. She was standing there, calculating how many cattle she could afford to lose before winter, when she saw the rider coming up the long road to her house. He sat tall in the saddle, and even from a distance Rose could see he was young. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped beside the door. Drifters and cowboys passed through Montana Territory regularly, and a woman alone had to be cautious. She waited, her face set in the expression that had turned away more than one unwanted visitor, as the rider drew closer. He stopped at a respectful distance, removing his hat. Rose found herself looking at a man who could not have been more than 25, with sandy brown hair and a face that had not yet been hardened by too many years under the sun. He was clean-shaven except for a shadow of stubble, with blue eyes that held something she had not expected, gentleness. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the spring air, "my name is Samuel James Kincaid. I am looking for work, and I heard in town that you might need a hand with fence repair." Rose felt her jaw tighten. "You heard wrong, I do not need help." Samuel Kincaid replaced his hat and nodded, but he did not turn his horse around. "Respectfully, ma'am, I saw your eastern fence line from the road. Those cattle of yours are going to end up in the next county if that section is not fixed properly. I am good with my hands, I work hard, and I do not drink or gamble my wages away. I would be willing to work for room and board until the fence is finished, and then we could discuss wages if you wanted to keep me on." "I said I do not need help," Rose crossed her arms. "And I certainly do not need a drifter telling me about my own ranch." Something flickered across the young cowboy's face, a flash of hurt that he quickly masked. "Yes, ma'am." "I apologize for the presumption." He began to turn his horse, a sturdy bay that looked as trail-worn as its rider. Rose watched him prepare to leave and felt something twist inside her. It was not sympathy, she told herself. It was simple economics. The fence did need fixing, and she did need help, even if admitting it felt like swallowing glass. "Wait," she heard herself say. Samuel turned back, his expression carefully neutral. "How much experience do you have with fence building?" she asked. 3 years working cattle ranches in Wyoming and Colorado, ma'am. Built more fence than I can count. I can show you my work before you commit to anything. If you are not satisfied with what I do in the first day, I will move on with no hard feelings." Rose studied him, looking for the signs of trouble she had learned to recognize. But his eyes were direct, his posture respectful without being obsequious. His clothes were worn but clean, his gear well-maintained, and most importantly, she was running out of options. "One day," she said finally. "You can sleep in the barn, I will provide meals. If your work is satisfactory, we will discuss terms for finishing the job. If not, you leave tomorrow evening." "That is more than fair, ma'am." Samuel dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. "I will get settled and start on that fence right away. Daylight is burning." Rose watched him go, already regretting her decision. She had built her life around isolation, around the belief that she was safer alone. Now she had invited a stranger onto her property, and the careful walls she had constructed felt suddenly fragile. That evening she brought supper to the barn as promised: beef stew, cornbread, and coffee. Samuel had already replaced 3 fence posts and was working on the 4th, despite having arrived mid-afternoon. His horse was brushed and fed, his bedroll neatly arranged in an empty stall, his saddle and gear organized with military precision. "You did not have to bring this out here, ma'am," he said, accepting the plate gratefully. "I could have come to the house." "I prefer to keep my home private," Rose said stiffly. "You will take your meals here while you work for me." "Understood." He sat down on a hay bale, and Rose noticed he bowed his head briefly before eating. When he looked up and caught her watching, he said, "My mother always insisted on saying grace. It is a habit I never lost." "Your mother must be a religious woman." She died 6 years ago, fever. My father followed her a year later. I think he just gave up after she was gone." Samuel took a bite of the stew. "This is excellent, ma'am, best meal I have had in weeks." Rose felt an unwanted pang of sympathy. She crushed it down ruthlessly. "The posts you set look solid. They will hold. That section should be finished tomorrow if the weather cooperates." He paused, then added carefully, "If you do not mind my saying so, ma'am, you have got a good operation here. The land is prime grazing and your cattle look healthy. With a little help, this place could really thrive." "It thrives fine as it is," Rose said, more sharply than she intended. "I have managed for 2 years on my own." "Yes, ma'am, I can see that you have." "I meant no disrespect." Samuel set down his plate and met her eyes directly. "I know what it is like to lose people and decide it is easier to be alone, but sometimes accepting help is not the same as being weak." Rose felt her face flush with anger and something else she did not want to name. "You know nothing about me or what I have lost." "You are right, I apologize." He picked up his plate again, his expression closing off. "I should not have spoken out of turn." Rose left without another word, walking back to her empty house with her heart pounding. How dare he presume to understand her? How dare he look at her with those kind eyes and suggest that her carefully constructed solitude was anything other than a choice? She slammed the door behind her and stood in the kitchen, breathing hard. But later that night, lying in her bed, she found herself thinking about what he had said. About his parents and how his father had given up after losing his mother, about loneliness and strength and the difference between the two. She had told herself for so long that she was being strong, that her isolation was a fortress. But lying there in the dark, Rose wondered if she had simply been hiding. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Through her window, she could see Samuel already at work on the fence line, his movements efficient and practiced. She dressed and made breakfast, and when she brought it out to him, she found that he had already completed 2 more sections. "You start early," she said, handing him the plate of eggs and bacon. "Old habit. On a cattle drive, you are up before the sun." He accepted the food and sat down on the ground, gesturing for her to join him. When she hesitated, he added, "It is your land, ma'am. I am just offering to share the view." Rose sat down, maintaining a careful distance between them. They ate in silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Finally Samuel said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Why do you still wear mourning black? It has been 2 years, has it not?" Rose stiffened. "That is none of your concern." "You are right. But I will tell you what I think if you will let me." He did not wait for permission. "I think you wear it because it keeps people away. It is a wall just like that fence, except this one is meant to keep folks out instead of cattle in." "You have a lot of opinions for a hired hand," Rose said coldly. "I do. One more day and I will be gone, so I figure I might as well speak honestly while I have the chance." Samuel set down his empty plate and looked at her directly. "You are scared. Not of being alone, but of not being alone. You are scared that if you let someone in, you will lose them like you lost your husband, and you will have to survive that pain again. So you have decided it is better to just stay behind your walls where it is safe." Rose stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. "How dare you?" "I dare because I have been exactly where you are." Samuel stood too, but he made no move toward her. After my parents died, I spent 2 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying anywhere long, never letting anyone get close. I told myself it was freedom, but it was just fear. Fear of caring and losing again. Fear of planting roots that could be torn up. And what changed? Rose heard herself ask, despite her anger. I woke up one morning in a boarding house in Cheyenne and realized I could not remember the last time anyone had said my name. Not a boss yelling it or a bartender calling for my order, but someone saying it like it mattered, like I mattered. He picked up both plates. I decided then that being safe and being alive are not the same thing. And I would rather risk pain than keep living like a ghost. He walked back toward the barn, leaving Rose standing alone by the fence line. She wanted to fire him on the spot, to tell him to pack his things and get off her property. But she could not make herself move. His words had cracked something inside her, and she was terrified of what might come spilling out. For the rest of the day, Rose avoided the fence line. She worked in her garden, cleaned the house, did anything to keep busy. But she found her eyes drawn again and again to where Samuel was working, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his movements steady and sure. He was younger than Thomas had been, younger even than her, but there was something solid about him. Something that suggested he had already survived enough to understand suffering. That evening when she brought his supper, she said, "The fence looks good. It is finished, should hold through any weather." Samuel accepted the plate but did not eat immediately. "I will leave in the morning, as we agreed." Rose opened her mouth to say good, to dismiss him and return to her safe, lonely life. Instead, she heard herself say, "What would you charge to stay on for the season? I could use help with the spring roundup and branding." Samuel looked surprised, then pleased. "Room, board, and $30 a month is standard, but I would be willing to negotiate if that is too much." "That is acceptable." Rose felt as if she were watching herself from a distance, making decisions her careful self would never approve. "We will draw up a proper agreement tomorrow. The same terms apply. You stay in the barn, take your meals separately, and respect my privacy." "Yes, ma'am, you will not regret this." Rose was already regretting it, but she nodded and left before she could change her mind. Over the next weeks, Samuel proved to be everything he had claimed. He worked from dawn until dusk, repairing buildings, tending cattle, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. He was quiet, respectful, and never presumed on their arrangement. But Rose found herself watching him more than she intended, noticing the way he talked gently to the horses, the care he took with even the smallest chore. And slowly, despite her best efforts, the walls began to crack. It started with small things. Samuel would leave wildflowers on the porch rail when he passed her garden. She would make extra biscuits with breakfast, knowing he favored them. They began taking their coffee together in the mornings, sitting on the porch in companionable silence as the sun rose over the mountains. One evening, nearly a month after Samuel arrived, Rose was startled by the sound of music. She found him in the barn, playing a battered harmonica, the notes sweet and mournful in the gathering dusk. He stopped when he saw her, looking embarrassed. "I am sorry, ma'am, did I disturb you?" "No." Rose stepped inside the barn. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me." "It is one of the few things I have left of his." Samuel turned the harmonica over in his hands. "Music is a comfort on lonely nights." "Play something else," Rose said, surprising herself. Samuel played, and Rose sat down on a hay bale to listen. The music spoke of longing and hope, of distances traveled and homes left behind. When he finished, Rose found her eyes were wet. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My mother used to say that music was how God reminded us we had souls," Samuel said, "that even when everything else was hard, beauty could still exist." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always respected people who were strong enough to survive." Samuel paused. "Can I ask what happened to your husband? You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Rose was surprised to find that she did want to answer. "Thomas died our first winter here. Pneumonia took him in less than a week. We had been married 6 months. I barely knew him, really. It was a practical arrangement more than a love match. He needed a wife to help prove up his claim, and I needed security after my father died." "But you still grieved him." "I did, not because I loved him desperately, but because his death meant I was alone. And because I felt guilty for not loving him more. Rose twisted her hands in her lap. Is that terrible? It is honest. There is nothing terrible about honesty. Samuel set down his harmonica. Can I tell you something? The first time I saw you, standing on that porch looking like you were ready to shoot me, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and the loneliest. Rose felt her heart begin to pound. Samuel, do not. Do not what? Tell the truth. He moved closer but did not touch her. I am not Thomas, Rose. I am not asking you to marry me or even to love me. But I am asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, you do not have to be alone anymore. That maybe you could let someone stand beside you, not because you need them, but because you want them there. I cannot. Rose stood up, backing away. I cannot do this. I cannot let myself care and then lose again. It will destroy me. Or maybe it will save you. Samuel's voice was gentle. I am not saying it would not hurt if something happened, but Rose, you are not living right now, you are just surviving. And that is not the same thing. Rose fled to the house and locked the door behind her. She leaned against it, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. He was right, and she hated him for it. She had survived by not feeling, by keeping everything locked away where it could not hurt her. But Samuel had walked into her life with his kind eyes and gentle words and made her feel again, and she was terrified. That night Rose dreamed of Thomas for the first time in months, but when she woke it was Samuel's face she remembered, Samuel's voice echoing in her mind. The next morning she found him already working, mending a harness that had broken. She stood in the barn doorway gathering her courage. Samuel. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. Ma'am. My name is Rose, I would like you to use it. Something shifted in his face, a careful hope. All right, Rose. And I have been thinking about what you said. She stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly together. You were right about all of it. I have been hiding and calling it strength. I have been so afraid of being hurt that I forgot how to be happy. And now I do not know, but I think I would like to find out. Rose took a deep breath. Would you have supper with me tonight in the house? Not as an employer and a hired hand, but as two people getting to know each other. Samuel's smile was like sunrise. I would be honored. That evening, Rose cooked a proper meal for the first time in 2 years. Chicken and dumplings, fresh bread, apple pie from her carefully hoarded preserves. She changed out of her work dress into a blue calico one, and she unpinned her hair, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Samuel arrived exactly on time, wearing a clean shirt and with his hair slicked back with water. He stopped in the doorway, staring at Rose with undisguised admiration. You are beautiful, he said simply. Rose felt herself blush. Come in, supper is ready. They sat at her small table, and for the first time the house did not feel empty. Samuel told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the long cattle drives and the men he had worked with. Rose found herself talking about her own past, about growing up in Ohio, about the journey west after her father died, about the dreams she had carried that seemed so distant now. What did you dream of? Samuel asked. A family, a home that felt full of life, children running through the rooms. Rose looked down at her plate. But after Thomas died, I told myself those dreams were foolish. That I should be content with survival. Dreams are never foolish, sometimes they just take longer to come true than we expect. Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and solid. Rose, I know this is fast, I know you are scared, but I need you to know that I am falling in love with you, I cannot help it, and I am not going anywhere unless you send me away. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. What if something happens to you? What if I lose you like I lost Thomas? Then you will grieve and it will hurt, and eventually you will survive it, because that is who you are. But Rose, we could have 20 years together or 50 years or just one more day, and every moment we have would be worth the risk. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. Do not let fear steal what could be the best parts of your life. Rose looked at their joined hands, at this young cowboy who had wandered into her life and turned everything upside down. She thought about the empty years stretching ahead if she sent him away, about growing old alone and bitter behind her walls. and she thought about what it would feel like to take the risk, to open her heart one more time. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "I know, but we will figure it out together." Samuel stood and drew her to her feet, and then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Rose melted into him, letting go of the fear, letting herself feel. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying, but this time the tears were not from grief. "Stay with me," she said, "not in the barn, here." "Stay with me. Are you sure?" "No, but I am choosing this anyway. I am choosing you." They spent that night wrapped in each other's arms, talking until dawn about their hopes and fears and dreams. Samuel held her like she was precious, and Rose let herself be held. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she had come home. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Rose had forgotten was possible. She and Samuel worked side by side during the day, and at night they sat together on the porch, watching the stars and planning a future. The ranch began to feel alive again, filled with laughter and music and hope. But happiness, Rose was learning, always came with a price on the frontier. It was a hot afternoon in late June when the riders appeared. Rose was in the garden when she heard Samuel shout a warning. She looked up to see 4 men on horseback approaching the house, and her blood ran cold. She recognized the leader, Gideon Marsh, a land speculator who had been trying to buy her property for 2 years. She had turned him down repeatedly, and each rejection had made him more aggressive. "Rose, get in the house," Samuel said quietly, moving to stand between her and the riders. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, and Rose realized she had never seen him wear it before. "Samuel, what is this about?" "Just get inside. Please." But Rose stayed where she was as Marsh and his men reined in their horses. Marsh was a heavy man in an expensive suit, his face florid and his eyes cold. He smiled when he saw Rose, but there was no warmth in it. "Mrs. Winters, how lovely to see you again, and you have hired help, I see. How industrious of you." "What do you want, Marsh?" Rose asked, keeping her voice steady. "I am here to make you one final offer on your property. $500, which is more than generous for this struggling little operation. You could take that money and go back east, live comfortably for years. I have told you before. This ranch is not for sale. Come now, be reasonable. A woman alone cannot properly manage a cattle operation. It is only a matter of time before you fail, and then you will lose everything. I am offering you a way out while you still have your dignity." "She is not alone," Samuel said quietly, "and she is managing just fine." Marsh's eyes narrowed as he looked at Samuel. "And who might you be, boy?" "Someone who is going to have to ask you to leave if you keep insulting the lady." "Insulting," Marsh laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "I am trying to help her, unlike you, I am sure. Tell me, Mrs. Winters, does this young cowboy think he is going to marry you and claim this land for himself? Is that his game?" "Get off my property," Rose said, her voice shaking with fury. "Now. I will leave. But you should know something about your hired hand, Mrs. Winters. I had you investigated, boy." Samuel James Kincaid, wanted for questioning in connection with a bank robbery in Wyoming 2 years ago. Seems you rode with a gang of outlaws before you came here. Rose felt the world tilt. She turned to look at Samuel, whose face had gone pale. "Samuel. It is not what you think," he said urgently. "Rose, please let me explain." "Oh, this should be good," Marsh said, settling back in his saddle. "Go ahead, boy. Explain to the widow how you are not a thief." Samuel kept his eyes on Rose. "I was part of a gang, yes, but I never robbed anyone. I rode with them for 6 months after my father died because I was angry and lost and did not care what happened to me. When they decided to rob that bank, I tried to stop them. I left the gang that night and have been trying to outrun that mistake ever since." "A touching story," Marsh said. "The sheriff in Wyoming might see it differently. Of course, I would have to send him a telegram letting him know where to find you, unless Mrs. Winters decides to be reasonable about selling her property." Rose felt sick. She looked at Samuel, at this man she had let into her heart and her bed, and wondered what else he had not told her. The fear that she had been pushing down for weeks came roaring back. This was why she had closed herself off. This was why love was too dangerous. "You have 1 week, Mrs. Winters," Marsh said, turning his horse. 1 week to decide if you want to sell or if you want to watch your lover hang for robbery. Choose wisely. The men rode away, leaving Rose and Samuel standing in the yard. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Rose, please," Samuel said finally, "let me explain properly. Yes, I rode with outlaws, but I was never part of a robbery. I left because I knew it was wrong. I have been trying to be a better man ever since." "You lied to me," Rose said, her voice flat. "You came here and you worked for me and you told me about your parents and your harmonica, and you made me believe you were someone you were not." "I never lied. I just did not tell you about the worst part of my past because I was ashamed of it. Rose, I am not that person anymore." "How do I know that? How do I know any of what you have told me is true?" Rose wrapped her arms around herself. "You said you were drifting from ranch to ranch. You never said it was because you were running from the law." "Because I knew you would react exactly like this." Samuel took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched back. "I knew if I told you, you would put your walls right back up and shut me out, and I could not bear that because I was already falling in love with you." Do not use love as an excuse for dishonesty." Rose felt tears streaming down her face. "I let you in, I trusted you, and now I find out you have been lying to me from the beginning. I made mistakes, Rose, bad ones, but I have spent 2 years trying to atone for them. And everything I have told you about how I feel, everything between us, that has been real." Rose shook her head. She felt like she was drowning, like the walls she had built were not high enough to protect her from this kind of pain. "I need you to leave. Rose, please." "Leave," she nearly screamed it. "Pack your things and get off my property. I do not want to see you again." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of anguish. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, if that is what you want, I will go. But Rose, I want you to know something. I love you, and I am not running this time. I will go to the sheriff in Bent Creek tomorrow and turn myself in. I will face whatever consequences come from my past, but I am not running anymore and I am not letting Marsh blackmail you. This is my mistake, not yours. Do not lose your ranch because of me." He turned and walked toward the barn, and Rose watched him go. She wanted to call him back to take it all back, but the fear was too strong. She had been right all along. Love was too dangerous. Caring too much led only to pain. That night Rose sat alone in her house and stared at the walls. The silence was absolute, and she realized how quickly she had gotten used to having Samuel there. The empty space he left behind was enormous. She told herself it was better this way, that she had narrowly avoided disaster. But her heart was not listening to her head. She thought about Samuel turning himself in, about him facing jail or worse because of a mistake he had made years ago. She thought about Marsh and his threats, about losing the ranch she had fought so hard to keep. And she thought about fear and how it had ruled her life for 2 years. Samuel's words came back to her. Being safe and being alive are not the same thing. She had sent him away to protect herself, but what had she protected? An empty house, a lonely life, the same fear that had kept her isolated and miserable. Samuel had been honest about his feelings, about his love for her. The only thing he had kept from her was a past he was ashamed of, a mistake he had been trying to outrun. And when confronted, his first thought had been to protect her, to turn himself in rather than let her lose her ranch. Rose stood up abruptly. She had been a coward. She had let fear make her decisions for her, had used Samuel's past as an excuse to push him away before he could hurt her. But he had not hurt her. She had hurt herself by not trusting in what they had built together. She grabbed her shawl and ran out to the barn. Samuel. The barn was empty. His horse was gone, his gear missing. He had already left, just as she had demanded. Rose stood in the empty space and felt something inside her break open. She had been so afraid of losing him that she had sent him away herself. She had proven all of her worst fears correct, but not because love was dangerous. Because she had been too scared to fight for it. Rose ran to the house and saddled her own horse with shaking hands. She rode toward town at a gallop, praying she was not too late. The sheriff's office was dark when she arrived, but there was a light on in the boarding house across the street. She pounded on the door until Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor, opened it in her nightgown. "Mrs. Winters." "What on earth?" "I need to know if Samuel Kincaid checked in tonight." That nice young cowboy? Yes, he is upstairs, room 3, but Mrs. Winters, it is almost midnight. Rose was already pushing past her, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She pounded on the door of room 3 until it opened. Samuel stood there in his undershirt and trousers, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Rose, what are you doing here?" "Do not turn yourself in," she said breathlessly, "please. Just listen to me first." Samuel stepped back, letting her into the small room. "Rose, I have to, it is the right thing to do. What if there is another way? What if we could prove to the sheriff in Wyoming that you were not part of the robbery?" Rose grabbed his hands. "You said you tried to stop them. There must be someone who can verify that, someone who knows the truth. Even if there is, why would you help me? I lied to you. You kept a secret, that is not the same thing." Rose took a deep breath. "Samuel, I was wrong. I was scared and I used your past as an excuse to push you away before I could get hurt. But the truth is, sending you away hurt worse than anything, because I love you. And I do not want to lose you, not to fear and not to a mistake you made before we even met." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you too. God, Rose, I love you so much. Then do not turn yourself in, not yet. Let me help you, let us fight this together." They talked through the night, piecing together a plan. Samuel remembered that the gang's leader, a man named Jake Fletcher, had been killed in a shootout with lawmen 6 months after the robbery. But there had been another man, a bartender in the town where the gang had stayed, who had heard Samuel arguing with Fletcher about the robbery plans. If they could find him, get him to testify that Samuel had opposed the robbery and left before it happened, they might be able to clear his name. "It is a long shot," Samuel said as dawn broke. "And even if we find him, there is no guarantee he will remember or agree to help. But it is a chance, and it is better than you turning yourself in when you are innocent." Rose squeezed his hand. "Besides, I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of letting fear make my decisions. If we are going to have a life together, we need to fight for it." Samuel kissed her and it felt like a promise. Together then. They rode to Wyoming, a week's journey that tested every ounce of their courage and commitment. Rose left her ranch in the care of a neighbor and she and Samuel traveled as fast as they dared. Along the way, they talked about everything, about their pasts, their fears, their dreams for the future. Rose learned about Samuel's childhood, about the father who had taught him to be honest and the mother who had taught him to be kind. Samuel learned about Rose's loneliness, about the years she had spent building walls and calling it strength. "I was so scared of being vulnerable," Rose admitted one night as they camped under the stars. "After Thomas died, I convinced myself that needing anyone was weakness. But being with you has taught me that vulnerability and strength can be the same thing, that it takes courage to open your heart." "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Samuel said, pulling her close, "and the bravest. You could have stayed safe behind your walls, but you chose to risk everything for me instead." They reached the town in Wyoming on a sweltering afternoon. The bartender Samuel remembered, a man named Pete Sullivan, was still working at the same saloon. At first, he was reluctant to get involved, but Rose's determination and Samuel's honesty eventually won him over. "I remember you," Sullivan said finally. "You were the one who tried to talk Fletcher out of that damned fool robbery, told him it was going to get someone killed. When you left, Fletcher said good riddance, that you did not have the stomach for real outlaw work." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Rose asked. Sullivan looked at Samuel for a long moment. "Yeah, I will testify. Fletcher and his boys shot up my saloon during that robbery. I have got no love for any of them. But if you are telling the truth, if you really did try to stop them, then you deserve a fair shake." With Sullivan's testimony and a statement from the sheriff confirming that Samuel had never been formally charged, only wanted for questioning, they were able to clear his name. It took 3 more days of bureaucracy and paperwork, but finally, the wanted notice was withdrawn. Samuel Kincaid was a free man with a clear record. They rode back to Montana lighter than they had left, laughing and making plans. But as they neared Bent Creek, Rose felt her anxiety return. "Marsh gave me a week, it has been more than 2. "Then we will deal with Marsh together," Samuel said firmly. But when they arrived at Rose's ranch, they found it was not Marsh they needed to worry about. A group of townspeople were gathered in the yard led by Pastor Williams from the church, Rose's neighbor, Mrs. Cooper hurried forward when she saw them. "Oh, Rose, thank goodness you are back. Marsh has been spreading terrible rumors about you and Mr. Kincaid. He is telling everyone that you are living in sin, that Samuel is a criminal, that you are unfit to own property. He has been trying to turn the whole town against you." Rose felt her heart sink. In a small frontier community, reputation was everything. If Marsh had poisoned the town against her, she could lose everything, not through force but through social pressure. But Pastor Williams stepped forward, his expression kind. "Mrs. Winters, Mrs. Cooper came to me with her concerns about Mr. Marsh's campaign. She told me that you and Mr. Kincaid are good people who have been unjustly maligned. I have taken the liberty of investigating Mr. Marsh's claims, and I have found them to be largely fabrications. The townspeople here today have come to offer you their support against his bullying." Rose looked around at the familiar faces. Neighbors, shopkeepers, people she had kept at arm's length for 2 years, and she saw acceptance in their eyes and support. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you all." "We take care of our own in Bent Creek," Pastor Williams said. "And you are one of ours, Mrs. Winters, whether you have let us get close before or not. Now, what can we do to help?" Samuel spoke up. "Marsh has been trying to force Rose to sell her land through threats and blackmail. He claimed I was a wanted criminal, but we have just come from Wyoming with proof that the charges against me were false. I have a clean record and witnesses who will testify to my character. Then we will make sure everyone in town knows the truth, Mrs. Cooper said firmly. "Gideon Marsh has been a blight on this community for too long. It is time someone stood up to him." And they did. Over the next days, the truth about Marsh's tactics spread through Bent Creek like wildfire. The townspeople rallied around Rose and Samuel, offering their support and their friendship. When Marsh tried to pressure the bank into foreclosing on Rose's mortgage, the bank president refused. When he attempted to buy adjacent properties to force Rose out, the other ranchers declined to sell. Finally, Marsh himself appeared at Rose's ranch one last time. But this time he was alone and defeated. "You win, Mrs. Winters," he said bitterly. "I am leaving Bent Creek. There is no profit to be made here anymore." "I hope wherever you go, you learn that bullying and threats are not the same as honest business," Rose said. "And that some things cannot be bought." After Marsh left, Samuel turned to Rose with a grin. "So, what now?" "Now," Rose said slowly, "I think we have some planning to do. Because if we are going to make this ranch a success, we need to do it right. And if we are going to build a life together, I think we should do that right too." Samuel's expression grew serious. He took both of her hands in his. "Rose Catherine Winters, I know we have not known each other long. I know we have faced more trouble in 3 months than most people face in years. But I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Rose felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes. Yes, Samuel James Kincaid, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Bent Creek, with half the town in attendance. Rose wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Cooper had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers from her garden. Samuel wore a new suit and a smile that could have lit up the whole Montana territory. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with such tenderness that Rose thought her heart might burst from happiness. The whole town celebrated with them, and Rose realized that in opening her heart to Samuel, she had opened it to the entire community. The walls she had built so carefully had come down, and in their place was connection, friendship, belonging. That night in their home, Samuel held Rose close and said, "I never thought I would find this. A place to belong, someone to love who loves me back." "Neither did I," Rose admitted. "I was so convinced that being alone was safer, but you taught me that the greatest risk is not loving at all." Over the next year, their ranch thrived. With Samuel's hard work and Rose's careful management, they expanded their herd and improved their land. The fence lines were strong, the cattle healthy, the buildings solid, but more than that, the house was filled with life. With laughter and music, with friends who visited and neighbors who helped. And when Rose discovered she was expecting a child the following spring, she felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had thought her dreams of family were lost forever, but here they were, coming true in ways more beautiful than she had dared to hope. On a warm afternoon, with her hand resting on her growing belly, Rose stood on the porch and watched Samuel working with the horses. He looked up and waved, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. She thought about the woman she had been, standing on this same porch 2 years ago, convinced that loneliness was safety and isolation was strength. That woman had been wrong about so many things, but she had also been brave enough when it mattered most to take the risk, to open her heart one more time, and that choice had made all the difference. Samuel came up to the porch and pulled her into his arms, resting his hand over hers on her belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how grateful I am that you rode up to my ranch that day. About how different my life would be if I had sent you away and never looked back." "You would have survived," Samuel said. "You always would have survived, but I am so glad you chose to do more than just survive." "So am I," Rose kissed him, pouring all of her love and gratitude into it. "So am I." Their daughter was born in the autumn, a healthy, squalling girl with her mother's gray eyes and her father's sandy hair. They named her Grace because Samuel said she was a gift of grace, unearned and precious beyond measure. And Rose, holding her daughter and watching her husband gaze at them both with wonder, knew he was right. The years that followed were not always easy. The frontier never was. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and fences broken by storms. But Rose and Samuel faced every challenge together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. They had 3 more children. 2 boys and another girl. The house that had once echoed with emptiness rang with the sound of children's laughter. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work was done, Samuel would take out his harmonica and play while Rose sat beside him on the porch. They would watch the sun set over the mountains and thank God for second chances, for the courage to risk everything, for love that had conquered fear and loneliness. Rose never wore black again. Instead, she dressed in colors as bright as the wildflowers that grew on her land, blues and greens and yellows. She let her hair down and her heart open, and she discovered that vulnerability was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. The lonely widow and the young cowboy had become a legend in Bent Creek, a story told to encourage others who had lost hope. People spoke of how they had faced down threats and overcome their pasts, how their love had brought them through every trial. And it was true that their romance was remarkable, but not because it was dramatic or sensational. It was remarkable because it was real, because 2 broken people had chosen to heal together. Because a woman who had built walls around her heart had found the courage to tear them down. Because a young man running from his past had learned to stand and fight for his future. And because in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Montana frontier, they had created something beautiful and lasting. A home, a family, a love that would endure through all the years to come. Rose Catherine Kincaid lived to be 83 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And until her last breath, she wore the silver wedding band Samuel had given her, a simple circle that represented everything she had almost been too afraid to claim. Partnership, devotion, and a love that had truly conquered all.